Hey, it's me, MLB. Here is part 9 of Sunshower. Aizawa, ex-female listener, ex-present Mike. Enjoy, you all know whose ending this one is. This was unexpected. The boys both looked at each other. Having to make a decision on who to date was coming to a head far quicker than either of them had been expecting. You had literally just touched down in Japan that afternoon and already you were kicking it up a gear. Hizashi really wanted to say something. You'd been special to him for the longest time, but that Valentine's Day on your final year of high school had changed his perspective. As Aizawa had mentioned, he and Aizawa had always been there for each other, and the two had discussed their feelings for you back then, and he could feel that nothing had changed since then. He and the messy Ravenette still both liked you. She will have to be the one to choose. It can't be Shouta or I, he thought, echoing his thoughts from all those years ago. He went to say something, but Aizawa spoke first, looking from Hizashi to you. How do you feel about us, Yin? Aizawa then asked, turning the question back on to you. No, I asked first, you said, back to the Ravenette, so pointed in your reply that Hizashi could have sworn he saw shards of ice shooting out from your words. I don't care about the order. Aizawa replied blandly. You need to answer my question, because it will determine my reply. Hizashi looked from Aizawa to you, then back to Aizawa. Don't be stubborn, you snorted lightly. This is a matter of the heart. I need your answer. I'll give you an answer after you answer my question. Aizawa said, I know more about what's going on here. It's more complicated than you think. Hizashi swallowed thickly and looked from his best friend to you and back to his best friend again. It was coming to a head real fast now. What was Aizawa planning to do? Well, you stated, after sighing heavily. You paused, and Hizashi could read the pain clearly on your face. The air around you all started to get heavy with static electricity as your stress levels skyrocketed. And not only that, but Hizashi could also hear the wind picking up outside and thunder rumbling away in the distance. Wanting to save you from a complete meltdown, he quickly spoke up. We might need to take a little break from this if it's getting to you, Yin, he said. But Aizawa cut in, holding up his hand to command attention. No, we're sorting this out now, he said, keeping his eyes locked onto you. Hizashi winced slightly and held his breath. You were really starting to feel the pressure now, and the room started to fill with more and more static electricity, making the hair on the back of Hizashi's neck stand on end. Hizashi was getting more and more nervous as the seconds ticked by, but Aizawa was just waiting patiently for your answer. After standing there fidgeting for a bit and opening and closing your mouth a few times, you finally had a mini meltdown, a cloud shooting in from outside the building and hanging over your head. I don't know. It's so hard to choose. I like both equally. I've had so many amazing memories with both of you, and it's unfair to make me choose, you blurted out, the cloud overhead suddenly dropping hail onto you. Ah, stop, you shouted, covering your head with your hands and crouching down. Thinking quickly, Hizashi jumped up and shouted at the cloud to move it with his quirk, while Aizawa got up and walked around the table and took his jacket off to hold it over your head, protecting you from the hail. See, you said as you gingerly looked up at the feeling of the cloud disappearing from overhead. You both help me, and you both compliment me from different angles. I can't choose. Aizawa looked at Hizashi and then down at you again. Now you know how we feel, he said. Hizashi nodded silently. It was true. It was a weird kind of torture to be in this situation. What do you mean? You asked, remaining crouched. Do you both like me? Yes, Hizashi said. I've liked you for the longest time and had every intention of asking you out that Valentine's Day that you spoke about in the car. But when I couldn't pay for the rest of the bouquet, Shouta paid for me, it really threw me. I couldn't do it then. I couldn't be so selfish. And that's when Shouta told me he liked you too. We spoke about it afterwards and promised each other we'd support each other no matter who you chose. I made up my mind that day that it would be you that would make the decision on who you wanted to be with. It couldn't come from me. I felt like this was the same for Shouta. Aizawa nodded. Well said. I had always determined that you'd make the decision, Yin, he said, pulling his jacket back to himself now that it had stopped hailing and you stood up. So, I like you both, and you both like me, you stated, making sure that you had it straight in your mind. And I have to be the one to choose. Hizashi looked at Aizawa and both boys nodded in unison. Well, that's unfair, isn't it? You suddenly wailed after thinking for a second. I have a solution, Aizawa then stated, and you looked at him with begging eyes. What is it? You pleaded. It's unconventional, he said. Honestly, I'm not surprised, he replied in a dead voice. Rude, but also true, he replied dryly, and you chuckled. Okay, well, tell me, what is it? You asked, standing up from the floor. Okay, he said with a head nod. No, you don't need to agree to this, but if you truly can't decide, then this will take the decision-making away from you, but it also won't place it on us either. It'll be down to chance and luck. And? You asked, wanting him to get to the point. What is it? Hizashi and I will walk down the hall and enter a classroom each and then close the door. Aizawa said, we'll make sure all the other doors are open, so you only have 2 doors to choose from. And then I have to pick a door? You asked with surprise. Seriously? You don't have to do this, Aizawa said again. You looked at him and then at Hizashi. Is this really how it's going to be? Hizashi thought with a heavy beating heart, still staring straight at you. Do you agree with this? You asked him. We can't choose, he said sadly. You have to choose, Yin. But either way, I respect both you and Shouta, and I want the best for both of you. So if you happen to be together, you have my blessing and my full support, and I hope that we can always continue to be together as friends, he said. Your heart tugged in your chest. You could see the look in his eye. He really wanted you to choose him. Same goes for me as well. As I said, if Hizashi gets chosen, I wish you both every happiness and hope we can continue to be friends. That's a given, boys, you said, your eyes welling with tears. No matter what happens, we'll always be the awesome trio that we are. Both boys nodded solemnly and then looked at each other. Okay, Hizashi said with a nervous breath in. Let's head to the sound booth. Aizawa nodded and pushed his hands into his pockets, leading the way out into the hall. Count to 20, Yin, he said over his shoulder as both boys left the room and turned right to walk down the hall. You started counting, the sound of you calling out number 1 echoing in Hizashi's brain. All the best, Aizawa said in his raspy voice as he turned to give his hand out to Hizashi for a handshake. And same to you, Hizashi replied in a much softer tone than usual. I'll head into this room, he said, pointing behind himself. I'll go in here, Aizawa replied, pointing behind himself. Both boys shook hands and then turned to their respective doors, while your counting continued. Hizashi quickly stepped into the room and silently closed the door behind him, turning to one of the desks there and walking over to it to rest against it. The wind outside was starting to pick up more now and was whistling loudly through the cracks in the window slats. It wouldn't be long now before you would open a door. Would it be his? He held his breath and looked down at the floor, hearing you scream the number 20, and then all went silent. Would she come in here? He wondered. It would be a dream come true if she came into this room. Outside in the hallway, he heard the sound of the floor creaking ever so slightly, and he looked up, staring at the door to the classroom. Slowly he saw the door opening, and his heart raced like crazy as you stepped in with your head down. Who's in here? You asked nervously, still with head down, your eyes tightly shut as you waited for his voice. It's me, he replied, his voice cracking slightly from the lack of oxygen being pushed around his system since his heart was beating so fast and breathing wasn't being done very much. It's you, you said, opening your now watery eyes and looking up as you ran into the room and into his embrace, your parted lips meeting his as you kissed passionately. The decision had now been made. You and your best friend, Hizashi, were now official. You were glad that you'd come back to Japan when you did. Shortly after you had finished kissing, Aizawa stepped into the room. Congratulations, you two, he said as he walked over. It was meant to be. And there you have Hizashi's End. Stay tuned for next week for the Poly one. We'll find out what happens in that one. I'll see you all then.